Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're exploring one of the most thrilling, honestly kind of surprising stories in all of history. It's the tale of the Roman Empire that just refused to die. When we think of ancient Rome, we almost always picture its dramatic, fiery collapse, right? But what if I told you that a massive, super powerful half of that empire actually survived for nearly 1,000 more years? Well, it did. So let's just dive right into this incredible story of survival, transformation, and how the ancient world was quite literally preserved for the future. To really get this, we have to look at a tale of two empires, or, well, really two halves of one giant empire. Back in the 4th and 5th centuries, the western half was facing this overwhelming pressure from Germanic migrations and invasions. We're talking the Visigoths, the Huns, and it eventually just fractured into a bunch of independent kingdoms. But meanwhile, over in the Roman East, they had a much shorter frontier to defend, plus way deeper pockets of wealth to just pay off those invaders, and a highly, highly organized society. So while the West collapsed, the East adapted. They survived, and they transformed into what we now call the Byzantine Empire.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The eastward shift. 2. Constantinople, the new Rome. 3. Justinian and Roman law. 4. Byzantine faith and art. 5. Preserving ancient ideas. And finally, number 6, a quick knowledge check and takeaway.
So Section 1, the eastward shift. How exactly did the center of the entire Roman world pack up and move from Italy all the way over to the eastern Mediterranean? Well, it all started out of absolute necessity. I mean, just look at how fast things changed here. In 235 CE, Rome entered what's known as the crisis of the 3rd century. And for nearly 50 years, it was just total chaos. We're talking civil wars, economic collapse, and literally over 26 different emperors claiming the throne. But then, in 284 CE, this guy named Diocletian takes power and manages to stabilize things. And not long after that, in 330 CE, Constantine makes the monumental decision to move the capital eastward, which completely sets the stage for rulers like Justinian a couple of centuries later. But you might be wondering, how did Diocletian actually stop all that chaos in the first place? Well, he did it by totally revamping the government and creating a brand new system called the Tetrarchy. A tetrarchy is basically a system of shared rule between 4 emperors. You see, Diocletian realized the empire was just way too big for any one person to defend, so he split up the leadership. 2 senior emperors and 2 junior emperors each took a specific region to defend. This was absolutely crucial in stabilizing the fracturing empire. And really, it was the first major sign that the Roman government was decentralizing, moving away from the city of Rome itself, which planted the seeds for that big eastward shift. Moving on to Section 2. Constantinople, the new Rome. When the Emperor Constantine eventually came to power, he decided he wanted a brand new imperial capital, one that was perfectly suited for the empire's totally new reality. And what a reality it was. Dedicated in 330 CE, this new city was built right on the site of ancient Byzantium, and it had some absolutely incredible geographic advantages. First off, it was right on the eastern frontier, super close to where all the major military campaigns were actually happening. Plus, economically, it was a massive hub. It sat perfectly at the crossroads of these giant global trade routes connecting Europe, the Near East, and the Balkans. Because of this, it was incredibly wealthy and practically an impenetrable fortress. It really became the new beating heart of the surviving empire. But here's the thing. Constantine didn't want people to think he was just abandoning Rome. He wanted them to know he was simply relocating it. He literally brought pieces of ancient history to his new city. I'm talking erecting a colossal statue of himself, and even packing up and moving the ancient serpent column all the way from Greece to Constantinople. Now, why go through all that trouble? To prove he was the true, legitimate heir to the Roman legacy. He wanted his citizens to walk around, look at these monuments, and feel this unbroken chain of Roman history right there in the East. All right, Section 3, Justinian and Roman law. Let's jump ahead to 527 CE and see how all of this builds into the absolute height of Byzantine power under the rule of our next major historical figure, Justinian. So Justinian was a guy with massive ambition. He basically looked at a map and hated the fact that the western half of the old empire had been taken over by Germanic kingdoms. So what does he do? He sends his brilliant general, Belisarius, to go take it back. And amazingly, with a relatively small force, they actually pull it off. They reconquered North Africa, marched right up into Italy, took back the city of Rome itself, and even grabbed parts of southern Spain. For a brief moment, Justinian had actually reunited a huge chunk of the Mediterranean.
But as wild as those military conquests were, Justinian's most lasting legacy wasn't actually on the battlefield. It was in the courtroom. A hugely crucial point in his reign was the creation of the Code of Justinian. You see, over centuries and centuries, Roman laws had become this incredibly confusing, contradictory mess. So, Justinian ordered his top legal experts to compile, organize, and completely standardize all of these laws into one single unified system. This new code became the ultimate foundation for preserving Roman law forever, and it actually went on to shape the legal systems of a ton of modern nations that we live in today. Pretty amazing, right? Moving to Section 4, Byzantine Faith and Art. Let's shift gears for a second to something that completely defined everyday life in the Byzantine Empire. Christianity was growing rapidly at this time, and it profoundly, deeply transformed their society. And honestly, there is no better symbol of this transformation than the Hagia Sophia. Funded by Justinian, this colossal church in Constantinople was an absolute marvel of engineering. It featured a massive main dome that was literally 105 feet in diameter. I mean, just imagine walking into a building of that scale back in the 6th century. It was deliberately designed to completely overwhelm your senses and to serve as the undeniable center of both imperial power and Christian devotion. It was the ultimate physical representation of the wealth and the sheer skill of the empire. And inside these spectacular churches, you would find our next key term, mosaics. The Byzantines took this older Roman art form and just pushed it to a whole new level. Mosaics are these incredibly elaborate images made by arranging thousands and thousands of tiny pieces of glass or stone. But here's the kicker. These weren't just pretty decorations. In a world where most everyday folks couldn't read, mosaics were actually super powerful teaching tools. They used this dazzling light and vibrant color to visually tell biblical stories and to depict holy figures, including, of course, Justinian and his wife, Empress Theodora. Doing this directly linked their earthly political rule straight to divine authority. Which brings us to Section 5, Preserving Ancient Ideas. This is really the core legacy of the Byzantine Empire. Sure, they had powerful armies and beautiful, towering churches, but their single greatest contribution to world history was acting as this giant, highly defended vault for classical knowledge. When historians study this era, they're always looking for continuity and change. Basically, what stayed the same and what was completely different. Well, for continuity, the Byzantines proudly called themselves Romans right until the end. They preserved Roman law through Justinian's code, and they meticulously kept classical Greek and Roman texts safe in their massive libraries. But, obviously, there was also major change. Over time, they essentially dropped Latin and fully adopted Greek as their main daily language. And of course, their entire society was now centered around an Orthodox Christian worldview, totally abandoning the old pagan gods of ancient Rome. All right, Section 6, Knowledge Check and Takeaway. We have covered a lot of ground today, from the strategic geography of Constantinople to the Code of Justinian, all the way to the stunning beauty of mosaics. So let's just pause for a quick, evidence-based knowledge check to see if you can apply what we've learned about Byzantine culture. Here's the question. Based on the historical evidence we've looked at, if you were a Byzantine elite, what language would you use to show your high status, and why? Think about this one carefully. We just talked about that tension between continuity and change, right? So if you were a wealthy, highly educated Byzantine elite living it up in Constantinople, what language would you specifically learn and use to show off your high status to everyone else? And why would you do it? I'll give you a second to think about the two main languages of the empire we discussed. Got it? The answer is Latin. Now, okay, I know this might seem like a bit of a trick question because we just established that the dominant, everyday spoken language of the Byzantine Empire was Greek. But you see, that's exactly why Latin was such a massive flex. The Code of Justinian preserved the laws in their original Latin, so fluency in Latin became a huge status symbol among the wealthy elite. It proved you were highly educated, and, probably most importantly, it showed that you were directly linked to those ancient classical roots of the original Roman Empire. It just beautifully highlights their deep desire to hold on to their glorious past, even while living in a totally changed world. Which brings us to our final takeaway for today. The Byzantine Empire acted as a vital, absolutely essential bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds. By surviving the chaos that completely swallowed the West, by building an impenetrable fortress over in Constantinople, and by carefully copying and storing ancient texts and laws, they ensured that classical civilization just wasn't lost to history. They didn't just survive, they actively protected the foundational ideas of law, art, and philosophy that would eventually help spark the Renaissance centuries later. So I'll leave you with this thought. If the East hadn't survived to protect all that knowledge, what would our modern world actually look like today? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the past.